The North Carolina Supreme Court just handed Donald Trump what sources are calling one of the most devastating legal defeats of his presidency, and the ruling could completely demolish his strategy for surviving the 2026 midterms. We're not talking about a narrow decision or split court ruling. We're talking about reports that every single justice, including Republican-appointed ones, unanimously agreed that GOP-drawn congressional maps violate the state constitution, that these gerrymandered districts were rigged specifically to guarantee Republican victories regardless of how voters actually cast their ballots. And sources suggest the most humiliating aspect for Trump might be that he has absolutely no way to appeal or overturn this decision. His conservative Supreme Court justices can't save him because federal courts have no jurisdiction over state constitutional rulings, which means the structural firewall Trump was counting on to protect him from Democratic investigations and impeachment proceedings could be crumbling right when he needs it most. And his response, reportedly calling the justices Democrat operatives in robes and urging legislators to simply ignore the ruling, might reveal just how panicked he is about what fair maps could mean for his political survival. But before we break down, please subscribe to our channel, John Brown Show. Your subscription actually matters here. All right, let's get into what the North Carolina Supreme Court actually ruled, and why sources suggest this represents existential threat to Trump's entire political strategy.
CBS 17's Nick Sturdivant is live outside of the state Supreme Court building in Raleigh tonight. And Nick, for Republicans, it's really now a matter of going back to the drawing board.
State's highest court directing Republicans not only to redraw plans, but to do it in 2 weeks.
Because Trump's plan for surviving his presidency has never been about governing effectively or maintaining popular support. Reports indicate it's been about rigging structural advantages so that public opinion doesn't matter. Gerrymandered congressional maps were allegedly central to that strategy. If you can draw districts that guarantee Republican House control, regardless of vote totals, you never face Democratic investigations or impeachment threats or subpoena power. The structural tilt protects you even when voters turn against you. And North Carolina maps were reportedly some of the most aggressively gerrymandered in the nation, designed to deliver Republican supermajorities even when the state votes evenly between parties. But now those maps are gone, declared unconstitutional. And the court didn't just send them back for minor fixes. Sources suggest they gave the legislature 30 days to draw fair maps, or the court will impose them directly, which means Trump just lost critical seats he was counting on. And if this pattern spreads to Wisconsin, Ohio, Georgia, and other states with pending redistricting challenges, his entire gerrymandered firewall could collapse before midterms even happen. Let's start by documenting exactly what the North Carolina Supreme Court ruled and why the unanimous nature of the decision might be so devastating for Trump's defense that these maps were legitimate. Because when you lose every single justice, including ones appointed by your own party, that reportedly suggests your position was legally indefensible. Sources indicate the court ruled that Republican-drawn maps violate the state constitution's guarantees of free elections and equal protection. Not that they were poorly drawn or suboptimal, that they violated fundamental constitutional rights. Think about what that finding means. The court allegedly determined that when you draw district lines specifically to predetermine election outcomes, you're not conducting free elections anymore. You're rigging the system. And the North Carolina Constitution prohibits that regardless of which party does it. Reports suggest the justices examined how districts were drawn and concluded Republicans used sophisticated data analysis to pack and crack Democratic voters in ways that guaranteed Republican victories. The packing technique reportedly involves cramming as many opposition voters as possible into a small number of districts. So instead of Democratic votes being spread across multiple competitive districts where they could influence outcomes, they're concentrated in a few districts Democrats win overwhelmingly. That wastes Democratic votes and minimizes their total seat count. The cracking technique allegedly splits up Democratic communities across multiple districts so they don't have enough votes to win any of them. You take a city that would naturally vote Democratic and divide it among several rural districts where Democratic votes get swallowed by Republican majorities. When you combine these techniques effectively, sources suggest you can create maps where one party wins huge seat majorities even when losing the popular vote. And that's reportedly what happened in North Carolina, Republicans won supermajorities of congressional seats despite the state being evenly divided between parties. Democrats could win more total votes statewide and still end up with far fewer representatives. That's not democracy. That might be rigged elections disguised as democracy. What makes this ruling particularly powerful is that it wasn't partisan split decision. Reports indicate the North Carolina Supreme Court has both Democratic and Republican-appointed justices, and every single one agreed these maps were unconstitutional. When you can't get even one sympathetic justice to dissent in your favor, that allegedly tells you something fundamental. Your position was so obviously wrong that no reasonable jurist could defend it. The maps were so blatantly rigged that even judges who might share your political preferences couldn't pretend they were legitimate. But here's what might make this ruling uniquely devastating for Trump compared to other legal defeats he's suffered. Sources indicate this decision is based entirely on the North Carolina state constitution. Not federal law, not the U.S. Constitution, state constitutional interpretation. And that means federal courts have absolutely no jurisdiction to review or overturn it. Trump's entire legal strategy has reportedly been about appealing unfavorable rulings to higher courts where he might find friendlier judges. Delay, delay, delay until you get to the Supreme Court where conservative justices he appointed might rule in his favor. That's worked for him in multiple contexts. But that strategy doesn't work here. Reports suggest the U.S. Supreme Court cannot hear appeals of state constitutional questions. They have no authority to second-guess how state courts interpret their own state constitutions. All those conservative justices Trump appointed are allegedly useless in this case. Amy Coney Barrett can't save him. Brett Kavanaugh can't save him. Neil Gorsuch can't save him. This is state matter decided under state law by state's highest court, and there's no federal remedy. Think about what that means for Trump's options. Normally, when he loses in court, he appeals, ties up the case for months or years, maybe eventually wins at higher level or at least delays consequences long enough to become irrelevant.
And you guys, Democrats and Republicans both reacting to the news of the court's decision. I want to read you two statements. The first one being from House Speaker Tim Moore. He said in the statement, in part, "I strongly disagree with the majority opinion. The majority opinion is not based in law, precedent, or the history of this state, but rather the political whims."
But here, sources suggest the ruling is final immediately. No appeals, no delays, no higher court to run to. The North Carolina Supreme Court said the maps are unconstitutional, and that's the end of it legally, which might explain why Trump has reportedly been urging Republican legislators to simply ignore the ruling, not to appeal it through proper channels, not to work within the system to address the court's concerns, to defy the state's highest court and keep using the old maps anyway. Legal experts allegedly say that would create constitutional crisis in North Carolina. You'd have the legislature claiming one set of maps is valid, while the court says different maps are required. Chaos and confusion right in the middle of election cycle with no clear way to resolve it. Now, Trump's willingness to urge that kind of defiance reportedly reveals how desperate he is about this ruling. He knows he can't win legally, can't appeal, can't delay. His only option might be creating such chaos that the system breaks down and nobody knows which maps are legitimate. That's not strategy of someone confident in their legal position. That's allegedly panic response from someone who recognizes they've lost and is willing to destroy institutional legitimacy rather than accept the loss. But let's talk about the practical political implications of this ruling, because sources suggest this isn't just abstract legal principle. This could flip actual congressional seats from Republican to Democratic control in ways that change who holds House majority. And when you understand the math, you might understand why Trump is so furious about losing these particular maps. Reports indicate analysts expect fair maps in North Carolina could shift 2 to 3 House seats toward Democrats. That might not sound like many seats, but consider the current House math. The Republican majority is reportedly razor thin. Just a handful of votes separate majority control from minority status. Every single seat matters when margins are that close. And midterm elections historically favor the party out of power. Trump's approval ratings have allegedly been declining. His policies are becoming increasingly unpopular. Republicans were already facing difficult midterm environment, even with gerrymandered maps protecting them. Now remove that protection in North Carolina and suddenly seats they thought were safe become competitive. Think about what 2 or 3 North Carolina seats could mean when combined with losses in other states. If Democrats flip those seats in North Carolina, plus seats in Wisconsin where maps are also being challenged, plus seats in Ohio where courts have repeatedly rejected gerrymandered districts, plus normal midterm swings in competitive districts nationwide, sources suggest you could be looking at Democratic House majority. And Democratic House majority means everything Trump has been trying to avoid. Investigations into the Epstein files that 99% remain sealed. Subpoenas for documents about January 6th and Trump's role. Hearings about the Minneapolis killings and ICE operations. Oversight of Trump's finances and potential fraud. Impeachment proceedings that could be backed by Jack Smith's prosecutorial testimony about proof beyond reasonable doubt. All of that becomes possible when Democrats control the House and have subpoena power and can schedule hearings. That's reportedly what terrifies Trump, not the abstract principle of fair elections, the concrete reality that fair elections might cost him the structural protection that's been shielding him from accountability. When you've built your entire survival strategy on rigged maps and those maps disappear, suddenly you're exposed to consequences you thought you'd successfully avoided. Looking closely, North Carolina isn't an isolated case. This ruling might encourage similar challenges in other states. When advocates see that state constitutional arguments can succeed where federal challenges failed, they allegedly pursue the same strategy elsewhere. State courts in Wisconsin, Ohio, Georgia, Pennsylvania could all face similar cases arguing that gerrymandered maps violate their state constitutions. And if those courts follow North Carolina's example, the entire national map could be redrawn in ways that eliminate Republican structural advantages. But let's break down how gerrymandering actually works, because understanding the technical details helps explain why courts are finding these maps unconstitutional. And sources suggest most people don't really understand how sophisticated and deliberate the rigging process has become. This isn't just drawing lines carelessly. Reports indicate it's using advanced data analysis and computer modeling to create districts that mathematically guarantee preferred outcomes regardless of how people vote. The process allegedly starts with having detailed data about every neighborhood's voting patterns. Republicans know which precincts vote heavily Democratic, which lean Republican, which are truly competitive. They know this down to individual blocks based on past election results. Then they use computer programs to test millions of possible district configurations to find the ones that maximize their seat advantage while still looking somewhat reasonable on a map. Think about the packing strategy in practice. Reports suggest you take a Democratic-leaning city and instead of splitting it among multiple districts where Democratic votes could influence several races, you draw one district that includes almost the entire city plus maybe some Democratic suburbs. That district votes may be 70 or 80% Democratic. Complete waste of all those extra Democratic votes beyond what's needed to win. Meanwhile, surrounding suburban and rural districts are drawn to have just enough Republican voters to win consistently by smaller margins. So Democrats pile up huge unnecessary margins in a few districts, while Republicans win comfortable but efficient margins in many more districts. The cracking strategy reportedly does the opposite. You take Democratic communities and split them among multiple Republican majority districts. So instead of Democrats having enough concentration to win any seats, their votes get diluted across many districts where they're always in the minority. You might have a city that's 60% Democratic, but you divide it among 4 rural districts where city Democratic votes get swamped by rural Republican votes. Those Democrats effectively have no representation despite being majority in their community. And sources suggest the sophistication has increased dramatically with technology. Computers can test how different configurations perform under various turnout scenarios, can model what happens if demographic trends continue, can optimize every single district to maximize partisan advantage. The result allegedly is maps that are nearly impossible to overcome through campaigning or persuasion. The outcomes are predetermined by the lines before any candidate even files to run. Now, North Carolina Supreme Court's ruling significant is that it identifies all of this as constitutional violation. Reports suggest the court said that when you use sophisticated techniques to predetermine outcomes, when you design maps specifically to give one party advantage regardless of what voters want, you're violating the fundamental right to free elections. And that might establish precedent other state courts can follow in their own gerrymandering cases. But what might reveal just how devastating this ruling is for Trump is his reported response to it. Because he didn't just express disappointment or disagree with the legal reasoning, sources indicate he attacked the justices personally and urged legislators to defy their own state's highest court. That's not normal political disagreement. That allegedly reveals panic about implications. Reports suggest Trump called the North Carolina Supreme Court justices Democrat operatives in robes. That's direct attack on judicial legitimacy, claiming judges who ruled against him aren't actually applying law, but rather advancing partisan agenda. But remember, the decision was unanimous. Reports indicate Republican-appointed justices voted the same way as Democratic-appointed justices. When you claim a unanimous court ruling is partisan, you're arguably not critiquing the decision. You might be revealing that you can't accept any ruling against you regardless of its legal basis. That judges who rule against Trump must be biased by definition because legitimate judges would side with him. Think about what Trump has allegedly been telling North Carolina legislators. Not to work within the system to address the court's concerns, not to draw better maps that comply with constitutional requirements, to ignore the ruling entirely and keep using the old unconstitutional maps. That's telling elected officials to violate their oaths of office, to defy their state constitution as interpreted by their state's highest court, to create constitutional crisis rather than accept unfavorable legal ruling. Legal experts reportedly say if the legislature actually follows Trump's advice, you could have competing claims about which maps are valid. Court saying one thing, legislature saying another. Election officials caught in the middle not knowing which authority to follow. That chaos would allegedly benefit Trump by making everything so confused that maybe the old maps stay in place by default. But it would come at cost of destroying institutional legitimacy and North Carolina's constitutional order. And sources suggest Trump's response reveals his fundamental view of courts and law. When courts rule in his favor, he celebrates them as fair and legitimate. When courts rule against him, even unanimously, including justices his party appointed, he attacks them as partisan and urges defiance of their orders. That's not someone who believes in rule of law as governing principle. That might be someone who believes in rule of Trump, where any constraint on his power is illegitimate by definition. Make sure you're subscribed to John Brown Show because there's reportedly another element to Trump's response. He's not just attacking this specific ruling. Sources suggest he's undermining confidence in judicial system generally when it acts against his interests. If his supporters believe courts are just partisan institutions rather than legitimate interpreters of law, they might support ignoring court orders across the board. That could lead to broader breakdown of constitutional governance where people simply refuse to accept legal rulings they politically oppose. But let's talk about what this ruling could mean for the 2026 midterms specifically, because sources suggest Trump was counting on gerrymandered maps as firewall against Democratic gains. And losing that firewall in North Carolina and potentially other states could transform the entire election landscape in ways that threaten his presidency. Reports indicate Trump's political strategy has never been about being popular or governing effectively. It's allegedly been about structural advantages that protect him regardless of public opinion. Gerrymandered maps were central to that strategy. If you can rig districts so Republicans win House control, even when losing the popular vote, you never have to worry about Democrats gaining investigative power. Never face subpoenas or oversight hearings or impeachment threats. The rigged system protects you. But now that system might be collapsing right when Trump needs it most. Think about the political environment Trump faces heading into midterms. His approval ratings have reportedly been declining as controversies mount. His policies on immigration and economics aren't delivering promised results. His administration is plagued by chaos and resignations. Normally, those conditions would produce major losses in midterms. But Trump allegedly thought gerrymandered maps would save him. That even if voters turned against Republicans, the rigged districts would deliver enough safe seats to maintain majority. Now remove that safety net in North Carolina. Suddenly, 2 or 3 seats that should have been easy Republican holds become competitive. Democrats have realistic chance to win them with fair maps. And if you multiply that pattern across other states where gerrymandered maps might also fall, sources suggest you're looking at potential Democratic wave that overwhelms whatever structural advantages remain. And there's reportedly psychological element. When Trump's own strategy gets struck down by courts, when his attempts to rig the system fail, that might demoralize Republican voters and energize Democrats. Republicans who thought they had elections locked up through gerrymandering might feel less motivated to actually turn out. Democrats who see courts defending fair elections might feel more empowered to mobilize. Those shifts in enthusiasm could compound the effects of fair maps in ways that produce even larger Democratic gains. Share this video with everyone you know because sources suggest there's also accountability element. If Democrats do take the House in November, the North Carolina ruling provides evidence for impeachment articles. Trump urged legislators to defy their state Supreme Court, to ignore constitutional ruling because it was politically inconvenient for him. That's abuse of office, using presidential influence to encourage constitutional violations. Democrats could cite that as impeachable conduct along with everything else they'd investigate about his administration. But North Carolina might be just the beginning of Trump's gerrymandering problems, because sources suggest there are redistricting challenges pending in multiple states, and the North Carolina ruling could provide template for winning them. Reports indicate state courts in Wisconsin have struck down Republican maps. Ohio courts have repeatedly rejected gerrymandered districts. Georgia, Pennsylvania, and other states have lawsuits challenging their congressional maps on similar grounds. What makes these challenges potentially powerful is that they're allegedly based on state constitutions rather than federal law. Voting rights advocates learned that the U.S. Supreme Court is hostile to federal gerrymandering challenges, so they switched strategies to arguing under state constitutions in state courts. And that strategy is reportedly working. When you point to specific language in state constitutions about free elections and equal protection, state Supreme Courts might be more receptive to striking down rigged maps than federal courts applying more limited federal standards. Think about what happens if North Carolina pattern spreads. Wisconsin Supreme Court strikes down gerrymandered maps there, flips 2 or 3 House seats toward Democrats. Ohio court does the same. Georgia court follows. Suddenly, you're looking at 8 to 12 House seats nationwide shifting from Republican to Democratic column just from fair redistricting. And that could easily be enough to flip House control given how narrow Republican majority is. And sources suggest there's feedback loop effect. Each successful challenge encourages more challenges in other states. When advocates see that state constitutional arguments work, they file similar cases everywhere. Courts that might have been hesitant to wade into redistricting see other courts doing it successfully and follow. The momentum builds toward comprehensive unwinding of gerrymandered maps that Republicans have relied on. But there's reportedly resistance Trump and Republicans will mount. They might try finding ways to attack state courts themselves, attempt to change state constitutions to explicitly allow partisan gerrymandering, pressure state legislators to ignore court rulings like Trump urged in North Carolina, use congressional power to retaliate against states that implement fair maps. All of that could create ongoing constitutional conflicts where Republicans fight to preserve rigged districts against courts trying to enforce fair election principles. Now, the ultimate question might be whether courts can actually enforce their redistricting rulings against determined political resistance. Sources suggest judges can strike down maps and order new ones drawn. But if legislators refuse to comply, if governors back that refusal, if state officials implement old maps anyway, courts have limited tools to force compliance. That's where constitutional crisis actually happens, when one branch issues orders and another branch simply refuses to follow them. And Trump's urging of that kind of defiance could be setting stage for exactly those crises in multiple states simultaneously. So here's what the North Carolina Supreme Court ruling reveals about Trump's vulnerability heading into midterms. A unanimous decision striking down gerrymandered maps he was counting on to protect House majority. Ruling based on state constitution that federal courts, including Trump's Supreme Court appointees, cannot appeal or overturn. expected shift of 2 to 3 House seats toward Democrats, in state that could be pivotal for majority control, and Trump's panicked response attacking the justices and urging legislators to defy their own state's highest court. The implications extend far beyond one state or one court case. This ruling might establish template for challenges in Wisconsin, Ohio, Georgia, and other states with similarly gerrymandered maps. If those challenges succeed, Trump's entire structural firewall against democratic accountability could collapse. Fair maps across multiple states could flip enough House seats to give Democrats majority. And Democratic majority means investigations, subpoenas, hearings, and impeachment proceedings Trump has desperately tried to avoid. Trump's response reveals his fundamental approach to governance. When courts rule against him even unanimously, even with his party's appointed justices voting against him, he attacks the courts as partisan and urges defiance of their orders. That's not respect for rule of law. That might be authoritarian instinct where any constraint on presidential power is illegitimate regardless of legal basis. And his willingness to create constitutional crises rather than accept unfavorable rulings shows how far he'll go to maintain power. The political stakes for November are enormous. If fair maps produce fair elections, if Democrats win seats that gerrymandering would have given Republicans, if House control flips because rigged districts get fixed, Trump faces the accountability he's built his entire strategy around avoiding. Every scandal he's buried, every investigation he's blocked, every abuse of power he's committed could come roaring back with Democratic oversight power. That's what he's really afraid of. Not abstract principle of fair elections. The concrete reality that fair elections might end his impunity and expose everything he's done. Stay tuned.